It's great to be here with Senator Tim Scott from the great state of South Carolina, Cynthia Lummis, the home state senator, and you know her well, and you know Tim well. It's going to be a great conversation. So there's a good thing and a bad thing about this. The bad thing is this is the last panel of the day. The good thing is there's nothing to stop you from keeping on through the evening. So you can just keep talking. There's no backstop here.
So what you're suggesting, though, is that we are the last panel, which means that we are between them and drinks. So we need to be good.
Drinks at altitude.
Exactly.
That's good. That's good. Makes it more exciting that way. A lot has been said through this conference. Some great panels. We've talked about American innovation. Yesterday there was a panel between the CFTC commissioners, a counsel to Anchorage Bank, and the opportunity to share with the attendees about what it means to have American leadership, the expression of American values through the dollar, what it means like that. So how, Cynthia, Senator Lummis, Senator Scott, how did you get to where you are today, supporting, being a champion, being the first senator to hold a cryptocurrency?
Well, it all started with my son-in-law, and a lot of it starts with a relative, a younger relative, who could see things that we can't see. And then I was asked to speak at the Satoshi Roundtable in 2017, and that's when I took my first dive into digital assets. I did that before I ever thought I would return to Washington and even run for the U.S. Senate. But when I got back in the Senate, I realized that this is just an asset class that very few people know about or understand. And there was very little recognition about how important it is. We all know now that the entire currency of the globe at some point is going to be digital. And whatever currencies they are, whatever means of exchange or stores of value we have, are going to be digitally based or have a digital version. And so having the United States lead in this area is critically important. The problem is we're not doing it. And other governments are getting ahead of us and want us to take the lead. And we haven't done it, and it's high time we did.
It's incredible to hear Cynthia talk about the bills that she's introduced and worked on, and to see that sort of understanding with within the industry of what it means to have your leadership. Senator Scott, if the elections go one way, it's very possible, very likely that you would become the chairman of the United States Senate Banking Committee. So obviously there's a lot of time between now and elections. How did you find yourself working in this industry, working with issues important to the industry?
Well, very similar to Cynthia's story. For me, my nephew was the person who sparked my interest in it several months ago. And one of the things he said to me that I think the industry should continue to embrace is it's so important to make sure that we as legislators understand the why. The stronger the why, the easier the what, and the clearer the how to get something done. And what my nephew really explained to me was that crypto gives me an opportunity to do what I love doing, which is looking for ways to create access points for the poorest Americans. I grew up in poverty in a single-parent household, and one of the things he started talking to me about was about democratization and how this provides more access points with a lower cost associated with transactions. And if you understand that the poorest Americans are smart, engaging, and willing to make the decisions that are in their best interest, trust them with the resources, but equip them with access points so they have an opportunity to make the best decisions at the lowest cost and have a better life. And so that really appealed to me. And every single time we make America a better and more level playing field, it means that we're providing financial access points to the greatest economy the world's ever known. And what Cynthia taught me was that we must first innovate before we regulate if we want to be the home to the innovation of the future.
Yeah. Both of you now have talked about an experience you had that brought you to want to explore more, to learn more, to dive deep into the issue. And I think that's important. So you're talking to people who are very familiar with blockchain, with AI, with crypto. So how should they approach here? Other members of Congress, policymakers, to find the nephew who can explain this to them, to go to a conference or attend a meeting, or a family member that shares this experience with you? What does that mean to everybody here who could be that advocate?
Well, for people who really understand this industry and have taken a deep dive into these assets, I think you'll find that if you take the Tim Scott approach instead of the Cynthia Lummis approach in dealing with senators, you'll have more success. One of the problems that I've had is trying to take a deep dive, trying to explain, as you were saying earlier, what's going on behind the wall of the electrical outlet instead of letting people just plug in their device and use it. So one of the really important strengths that Senator Tim Scott will bring to the Banking Committee is he's helping people learn how to take the advice and plug it in the wall and just use it. Don't try to tell them what's going on behind the wall. And that's always been part of my problem. I think I try to take too deep a dive. One of the stories that I told you, I'm sitting around in the cloakroom one day, and Lindsey Graham says to me, "Hey, Bitcoin lady, what's a Bitcoin?" And so I think, man, this is my chance. And 20 seconds later, I've lost him because...
He's still asking the question.
Yeah, yes. And it's because I can't give him the elevator speech answer. That's what Tim Scott's really good at. He's good at being aspirational about what does this do to unleash American innovation, opportunity, and that's the magic. If you can discuss it that way, you're going to open somebody's heart and their mind at the same time.
I think to Cynthia's point, I mean, when she walked in, everybody gave her a strong round of applause because she's been the champion of the industry for years. You know that she understands and appreciates the specificity, the specific component parts of what makes this the most innovative time perhaps in American history, and why you all are leaders in this industry. Unfortunately, there's only one Cynthia Lummis.
Yeah.
There's a lot of Tim Scotts in the United States Senate. And we're also a bunch of octogenarians. I mean, they're 80-year-olds all around the place, which means that trying to explain the current that runs through the wall that gets to the light switch is not going to be easy. But figuring out where the light switch is in the middle of the dark is really important. So turning the light on for senators requires us not to explain electrical currents and how it works, but why it's important. And once you get to the why it's important, then you can backfill, perhaps for some of the senators, the current flow. But until then, we need to make sure that we partner together on the Banking Committee to have a conversation about illuminating the industry so that we as policymakers come to the conclusion that it is in America's best interest to have the innovation happen here at home, not in Europe, not in the Indo-Pacific, but here at home, because the strength of the American economy is innovation. It always has been, and it always will be. And if we forget that, we've lost perspective and focus on what our jobs are as legislators, especially in the financial space.
And so that's you just had one scoop of the Tim Scott magic just now. And
I was a big scoop because there ain't a lot of magic in Tim Scott.
So you're gonna want a double scoop and a triple scoop because he inspires people to want to legislate and not turn our back on these subjects simply because they're complicated.
And getting to that point, talking about the Senate Banking Committee, I mean, again, I just had a question for both of you. What does the Wisconsin base price of milk have to do with this industry?
I know the answer. Does anyone out here know? Bitcoin and Ethereum are commodities. Milk is a commodity, so they come under the jurisdiction of the Senate or the Senate Agriculture Committee.
And so that's what I wanted to get into now, is the Wisconsin base milk price and potatoes and wheat and corn and Bitcoin and others, discussions of bills are going to go through the United States Senate Ag Committee, the House Ag Committee, and the process that it takes. I think most people in this room are probably real fans of a Washington that is known to get things done, to solve problems, and always be on time and on task. And so with that in mind...
When was that?
Sorry, I may have been reading the wrong note here.
Sorry.
So we ended the summer, July, August, with some momentum possibly on legislation. Cynthia, you've been a key player on this with a number of good bipartisan partners. Talk about some of the process and what it looks like to get a bill through the Senate, a bill through Congress, where you've been, the challenges you've had, and the successes you've had.
Yeah, well, it's much easier to stop something from happening in Washington than to get something done in Washington. And for this industry, that's been really unfortunate, as we know, because the regulators have tended to be very anti-innovation. And so the response of the SEC has been lack of clarity followed by enforcement actions and litigation. That the same has been true with the Fed. Their denial of master accounts has been absurd. So you're dealing with a murky and adversarial executive branch. And unfortunately, we haven't been able to garner the momentum in the legislative branch to come up with a legislative framework. I've had a fabulous partner in Senator Kirsten Gillibrand. Can't say enough good things about her and as a bipartisan partner. But on the Senate Banking Committee, we've got headwinds. She's not on the Banking Committee. I am. Of course, Senator Scott is the ranking Republican on Senate Banking. But the headwinds have been mighty in terms of Sherrod Brown and Elizabeth Warren, and they've been extremely influential with their colleagues on the Democrat side of the aisle. So we've hit the wall on the Banking Committee. Committees in the Senate, I have found out, and you and I both, well, we all served in the House before we were in the...
Your house
I
broken.
forgot about that, yeah.
House broken.
House broken, not Senate trained. Yeah.
House broken, not Senate trained. I'll have to remember that. Senate committees are really jealous of protecting their jurisdiction. So the only way we're going to get anything done this year is if it comes through the Senate Agriculture Committee in the form of Commodity Futures Trading Commission. So let's just play out the scenario if it were to happen under best case. And that would be if the bill that deals with CFTC jurisdiction is voted out of the Senate Ag Committee after the election, then it's Christmas treed, as we call it, when it gets on the floor of the Senate with stablecoin legislation, with definition using the Howey test as updated, using ancillary assets definition to help sort that out. And then Chuck Schumer gets to add his safer banking bill, and all of a sudden you come up with a very broad financial services bill. And then it's got enough oomph to pass. And so that's a scenario that actually could play out after the election. The challenge is going to be having enough legislative days to pull something like that off. And it's surprising how few of those are left after the election.
Yeah, and Senator Scott, you want to talk a little bit about the dynamics of the committee, working with Democrats, and how to get the support for something that can move?
Yeah, I think what Cynthia said is so important. But what she described is the lame duck session that occurs after the presidential election, where we have a very short period of time to get a lot accomplished. The Christmas tree that she just described is taking multiple bills and attaching it to the same must-pass piece of legislation. Therefore, you have an opportunity to get a lot accomplished in a little bit of time because the motivation and the incentives are there. Two pieces of the incentives that are really important. McHenry, Financial Services, Stabenow, Agriculture, both retiring members. Schumer wants to give Stabenow a swan song, which could be this legislation. So you have the forces on both sides of the aisle in a bicameral way working to get something done so that their legacy includes legislation that will be incredibly beneficial, not only to the industry, but in my opinion, to the American consumer. The banking committee, with Brown being in place and Elizabeth Warren being on the committee, we just need to decimate that side of the aisle and get 2 new members so we get something done. I mean, there's no other easier way to put that. God bless Ohio and burning soon. So the fact of the matter is that the best path forward is in the lame duck session this year, with the CFTC being the focus as opposed to the SEC. You all know this better than I, but the SEC has been a pain in the rear end, and folks like Crenshaw and Gensler won't be changing their position. However, with new leadership, i.e. myself as the banking chair and Cynthia as an active member, wouldn't it be kind of cool if we had a subcommittee on the banking committee that focuses on the industry, so that we bring more light to the conversation, more hearings on the industry, so that we get things done faster? And this is how I say it at home. We go further, faster in a shorter period of time, because we have the kind of motivation and momentum that leads to having bills on the floor marked up in the banking committee, and we get it, vote yes or no. You know who's with you, and you know who's against you. In the murky reality of today, you're guessing except for a few obvious members who have stood up and said, we are opposed to the industry.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point. I want to draw that out a little bit more, because what you just described would be a historic announcement, I think, that you would create the first ever digital asset committee of the United States Senate.
It would take a change in the rules, but the good news is there's so many folks, and thank God President Trump has been very clear on his position of being pro-crypto. That position puts the entire Republican apparatus on the table, leaning in, looking for a solution. That was not the case. I mean, thank God for your brother-in-law, my nephew, who helped us get to the table. But now we have someone on the presidential level giving credibility and credence for the rest of the team, the red team, to jump on board, and it eliminates lots of hurdles that saves years of time of negotiating.
Well, if you're taking applications for the committee chairs, I happen to know somebody who is very good for those kinds of roles. I don't know if that's
Cory, I'm only taking one application.
That's great.
There's someone from Wyoming, but not named Barrasso. Let me know who that is.
Put me in, Coach. I'm ready to play.
All right.
They say that in Washington, D.C. is the only place where sound travels faster than light. And so it made a little bit of I think, incredible news and announcement there. I'd like to just ask a question, too, about what you think, though, can be done between, you touched on it a little bit, between now and January, the lame duck session, what it means. How can you get a administration engaged in passage? Will they be a roadblock? What happens with Gary Gensler? Do you see an impediment from the administrative side of things?
I think the short answer is Gensler is always going to be Gensler. Replacing him is absolutely essential. It's one of the reasons why the lame duck session will be punctuated by the CFTC and moving away from the SEC and towards what can be done. What Cynthia described earlier is the path forward in the lame duck session, where Stabenow, Gillibrand, Lummis, all working, and I believe McHenry as well, all working hand in glove in a way that gives us a reason to believe that if it's going to happen, it will happen through the Agriculture Committee and not through the Financial Services or Banking Committee. That's too high of a mountain for Sherrod Brown, Elizabeth Warren to change their stripes between now and January 1st. I don't have any confidence in that, but I do have confidence in Stabenow continuing to push forward on her committee and having that Christmas tree include language from Lummis Gillibrand that will be very important to the industry, that will be debated and hopefully passed before we leave by the new year.
And neither side has the votes to pass a party line vote. Neither side has the ability to get something done on their own. It is going to take bipartisan support. You've got an incredible partnership with Senator Gillibrand.
Yeah, she's been terrific to work with. She was a securities lawyer I think, for 12 years. So she has familiarity with that side of the equation. The state of New York has a robust dual banking system partner, and so they're pretty sophisticated. Wyoming is very sophisticated in terms of its statutory framework and its regulatory support through the Banking Commission. So our states are similarly situated from the dual banking system state banks perspective.
Senator Scott, I want to go back to something you said about opportunity zones. You talked a little about opportunity and what brought you to this.
Yes.
As you discuss with policymakers, I think oftentimes they hear about this issue in the terms of a payment system or a transaction. Yeah. What does this mean beyond that kind of a conversation?
You know, I ran for public office because I had a mentor who taught me that if I wanted to make a difference in the lives of other Americans, one of the fastest ways to do that was through public service. And I've kept that as my focus for the last 15 years in Congress and now in the Senate. And what that means is that I'm focusing on making sure that the average American that's working paycheck to paycheck, trying to make their ends meet with too little time to focus on politics, they have a reason to be inspired and motivated about what's happening on the federal level. That means it can't be about me. It's not even about Cynthia. Cynthia is focusing on the constituents, not just in Wyoming, but she's a United States senator. I'm doing the same thing. So when you find people who understand that this conversation is about people who can't hire a lobbyist, who deserve access to the greatest economic engine the world has ever known, it's called America. And if we're going to protect that engine, if we're going to protect the goose that lays the golden eggs, we do that by focusing on what creates results right now. And the industry is producing results. There's billions and billions of dollars on the sidelines right now because there's not clarity and certainty in the regulatory state in the United States of America. There's billions of dollars on the sideline because there's not a legislative vehicle that has been passed that gives certainty and guardrails on what to do next. When we get that done, and we will get it done, billions of dollars will be added to our economy, and millions of Americans will have a lower cost point, and they'll be able to make their decisions right at home.
So one of the things that excites me about a Tim Scott chairmanship of the Banking Committee is he's not going to be there looking out for the interests of the too big to fail banks. He's there to look out for the interests of the everyday American, especially those who are struggling paycheck to paycheck. That's who I want chairing that committee. And you can move the needle in a unique way in that role. And I want to make a pitch. I've always tried to be very bipartisan with regard to digital assets, the way I talk about them, the way I legislate, the people with whom I interact. But here's something I know. I'm going to put my partisan hat on for a minute. There is no indication that the Democrats' candidate for president is going to be good to this industry. Not a single indication. The Republican platform was written by basically Donald Trump, and he's supportive of digital assets. He has spoken positively about digital assets. He wants to move the needle in this area. This election is the one election of the next 3 cycles, this one and 2 others, that looks most favorably towards Republicans. If we had...
And that's because the constitutional one-third of the Senate election, it's more favorable this election than it is 2 years from now and 2 years from then.
Exactly. Yeah. So the Democrats are defending more seats in like purple states. And in the next 2 elections, we're going to be on defense in purple states. So the best map for Republicans is this one. If we had a Republican president, Republican House and Senate for 2 years, we could move mountains. We could be significant. We could take the lead in this industry and others and move the needle in a positive direction that fosters innovation. If we miss this opportunity, we don't have the same opportunity for a long, long time. So if I know that sounds partisan, it is partisan, but it's also the truth. So, my gosh, people, please look at who's been your advocates and help your advocates.
Well, to your point, Cynthia, it's not about being red or blue. It's really about self-interest. Americans vote on typically pocketbook issues and then community issues. President Donald Trump said in Nashville at the Bitcoin conference, one of the first things he's going to do as president of the United States is fire Gary Gensler.
Yeah.
Anybody disagree? So that is the clarity and the decision-making that you should consider when you're voting, period.
And so we're just a couple of weeks away from Labor Day, which is, I think, a lot of people see as the traditional kickoff to the hard grind of Election Day, 2 November. You've got, I think, early ballots going out, early voting taking place in September in some states. So you've got a lot of political activity that is starting to hit its full stride. You've got this week, the middle of the Democratic National Committee having their convention in Chicago. So let's talk a little bit about what you see happening election-wise. You've got the majority, very thin majority held by Republicans in the House, Democrat majority in the Senate, the presidential race. Why don't we go ahead and start there? If you're looking at the presidential race, any prognostications, bets, things that you can share with us?
Well, having been in the U.S. Senate for only 3.5 years, all of which have been in the minority with a Democrat president, I am saying no mas. I can't take anymore. Vice President Kamala Harris has set a historical record for our country of breaking more ties than any other vice president in her role as president of the United States Senate. We vote 50-50. She comes in, breaks the tie, and we lose every one of those ties. And it's been disheartening, and it's hard. And it's been hard on free enterprise Americans. It's been hard on individual Americans, because these votes are cast for a strong central government. That's their approach. That's where they believe the importance and the decision-making should lie. I don't believe that at all. I believe it should lie in this room, in this front row, with every individual in this room, with the states and the people, just like the 10th Amendment said. So it is a stark contrast. That said, I am praying that Donald Trump wins the election. But I don't know what's going to happen. It's too close to call. What do you say?
I'm right where you are, but I like to put a little more skin on the bones, because I think you just did a really good job of articulating why Donald Trump and why not specifically Kamala Harris. Think about her most recent economic proposal. I'm not sure if you had enough time to pay attention to it or not, but one of the things she wants to do is to increase the tax on capital gains to like 46%. And then, to go a step further, she wants to have a tax of 25% on unrealized capital gains. The only thing you can say to that is, huh? What you talking about, Willis? Fact be told, I don't know what she's talking about, Willis. Because how in the world do you figure out?
Talking about a lot of money. Weird, takings and you name it, yeah.
Think about this. This started under the Obama administration when they started flirting with taxing unrealized gain. What does that mean? It means if you're a farmer and you own thousands of acres of land or hundreds of acres of land, but do not have the cash in your account, you have to then go to the bank to leverage money against your farm to pay an unrealized gain. Think about the industry. If you have an investment in something that has not yet been realized, should you be taxed on something you can't spend because it's invested? The answer is Hades no in South Carolina.
So, we've got about 5 minutes left in the conversation. Get to the U.S. Senate. Obviously, this is a very tight Senate right now. And with West Virginia, I think a lot of people assume that Governor Justice will win now that Joe Manchin is not running. And that basically ties the Senate in effect.
Yes.
And it leaves you with a couple of races, challenging races in Ohio, Montana, Arizona, Nevada, Wisconsin, Michigan. Quickly, how do you see some of those races? What's the keys to the Senate majority? Stay Democrat, stay Republican. What do you see as the key?
You've been all over this country in the last months. Why don't you take that?
First, I'd say Justice is only up by about 50 points. I'm going to go ahead and call West Virginia for Republicans. If you get a 50
I've seen enough.
Yes, exactly. Like 70, 30, 60, whatever 50 is. Yes. It's a big behind kicking. Montana, our candidate's up by 3.5 to 4 points. Really good news. He's still rising, and that's great news. Nevada, we're within the margin of error. Frankly, Ohio, Sherrod Brown, who is antithetical to everything that you believe in from this industry perspective.
That's right.
Moreno is within the margin of error, and his name recognition is only around 70%. So over the next 70 days or so, he has a chance to get his name recognition from 70 to 90. If he gets to the 90, in my opinion, he wins, period. Takes a lot of cash to do that, but Fair Shake has been a very important piece to what's going to happen in Ohio. So I think we have a good chance there. I say we end up with 52 seats, maybe 53.
I want to put in a pitch for Sheehy in Montana. I was with him a couple weeks ago, and he spoke so positively about digital assets, about cryptocurrency, about digital assets and the digital economy and the world to come. I didn't know that was part of his interest or knowledge base or worldview, and it very much is. And contrast that with his opponent, good heavens. That is as sharp a contrast as you have in Ohio. So by all means, Republican Senate candidate Sheehy in Montana is with us.
So in the remaining 2 minutes, I want to give you a little bit of time each to describe why, as people go back home, they go back to their work, they go back to investment opportunities, they go back to their institutions and share with their partners what they've learned here. Why should they be positive and hopeful about the future and the work that can be done? Senator Lummis.
We're in transformative times. This is a unique time in our history. It's been so disruptive, and part of this disruption is because we're moving into a digital economy. And you're at the forefront of it. But the digital economy also unleashes the sovereign individual, the person who can be determinative of their own life if they're unshackled from a government that wants to control us from the center. This is the election that will choose the path in America between whether we're going to allow ourselves to be controlled from a central authority in Washington, D.C. that doesn't trust its own people, or whether we're going to take advantage of the economy that's being transformed by the people in this room to become strong, independent individuals who have control over their own lives. That's how significant I think this election is.
Senator Scott, hopeful chairman of the Senate Banking Committee, you look out and you say to America, what does it mean to keep innovation here? Why should America, why should the attendees be positive about where we are in this country?
Well, creative destruction is a spark of capitalism and the birthplace of free markets. If you want to see the most transformative economy the world has ever known, just look in your backyard. It's called America. If we're going to continue to be the most transformative place economically on the planet, innovation must start here. And it has to grow as fast as humanly possible to help as many humans as possible, starting in our backyards, but spreading across the globe.
Thank you both. Thanks for having us in Wyoming.